Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So let's begin our session with a wonderful quote. Teamwork make the dream work. Good evening everyone. I Gaurav Srivastava being your host for today's international webinar on the topic how to solve impossible problem in a team. Extend my warm greeting and a very good evening to all of you present here. As we know that break down the problem into smaller manageable components. Encourage diverse perspective and creative thinking. Embrace failure as learning opportunity and iterate on solutions. Talking about SEMS Welfare Foundation, we are a Section 8 not-for-profit company registered under Company Act with the various recognition from NIT IO, MSME, MPCon, DDU, GKY, and more. Recognized as a startup by DIPP, MCI and awarded Best Service Award for National Contribution. SEMS Group with an active network of 5,000 plus professionals, published book and international journal, organized education and health camp for underprivileged children, promoted digital and financial literacy and contributed to society. Our initiative, Digi Shaksham, has developed content for 300 plus schools in IT, BFSI, retail, entrepreneurship impacting diverse age group. We have executed a skilling project for 600 inmates, signed MOUs for training, collaborated with various organizations, and conducted international conferences. FameLead's other SEMS initiative empowers women through workshop and newsletter, conducting awareness program in digital literacy, marketing, and career development across different industries. We have impacted over 1,000 women across state and recently celebrated a milestone of 100 women associated with the program. On behalf of whole SEMS family, I welcome you all for today's international webinar on how to solve impossible problem in team. And to add our guest of honor, today's speaker, Chuck Kirkpatrick, it is a great honor to have you with us, sir. We are grateful for your presence here with us today. He talked about leadership in innovation and technologies. He was born in Central Africa and raised in United States. He has supported service and tech projects in 25 countries with a patent in voice and web-based AI and many awards for product build. He talked to team about how to reach the next level. His impossible problem-solving framework may inspire you about your next right steps. He has 2 degrees in international relations and public policy. He studied with Nobel Prize winning economist Eleanor Ostrom at Indiana University. Her research on incentive system, resolutionized forestry, water system, and community resource use all over the world. He live in Arizona, teaching about the team building, improving software, and etc. Now over to you, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it. What a wonderful gift it is. I bring you greetings today from Phoenix, Arizona, and wanted to share that, it's an incredible opportunity to have a chance to talk about what it means to work together. When I talk about impossible problems and talk about how to help teams reach the next level, what I'm really doing is talking about what we are in the midst of. The work that we do is international today. The work that we do is connected between different countries. And what the great gift to me is between the work that I do in the United States and work that I have done on projects in India is that both the United States and India are significant in the story about democracy. They're significant in the story about conservative trending democracies. And they also are countries that each have their own traditions of faith. I think there's real growth potential for India and the United States because of the fact that we are both very similar in wanting to tell a democratic story, wanting to tell a capitalist story, but still keep our traditions and keep telling stories about faith and work, telling stories about people who participate in their local communities in various ways, and also have a global story. So I thank you today, first and foremost, for the chance to talk to you about a trip I made to Hyderabad, India, and also talk to you about examples of how to solve impossible problems. So the setup for my stories today is that I was given a task. And in the United States, the idea was that we would have a couple of teams built out in Hyderabad, India. We were going to do technology work. We were doing different kinds of software. We had offices in other parts of India as well. And the particular company I was working with was working on contact center software, but the problems and the things we'll talk about are no different than working with any other kinds of company. So the question I was asked was, could I figure out, quote unquote, what was wrong with the Hyderabad office. And what leaders meant was it was a new office and it wasn't giving quite the performance that they thought. There wasn't the same level of output that they expected. And in the stories, it is truly the modern examples of an office that hadn't been trained to the same level as our team members in the United States. It was an office that had very new staff members that had never worked in this kind of software before. So there were a lot of reasons why challenges might be there. But my job was to go and figure out what could we do to make it better. It seemed to many in the United States like so far it was just an open question. And I went with an open mind because dropping into the Hyderabad office, I wasn't going to be able to say, oh my goodness, this is so terrible. How on earth could you people be doing X, Y, Z? Like I needed to go with an open mind and approach it as friends and have a chance to say, what could we do together to collaborate and solve these problems? So from the very first, I think it's important to think about 3 or 4 things that leaders do in approaching solving a problem. And first and foremost, you've got to have a conviction that you know what you care about, you know what you believe enough that you can make a difference in going to have a conversation. I think the second thing that leaders do in going to a place like that is you need to know who the people are who are like you're wanting to work with. You have to know about what values matter for the work that you're doing. The third thing that I think a leader does in preparing is think about what other people have done to solve a problem so that you can then build on frameworks or the ideas that have already been tried. When you're looking at going to a new office and having a conversation about those things, performance, are the team members being trained well, other aspects, you really have to have a conviction that you can solve these things through collaboration or learning, through changing the systems that are in place. So I mentioned those couple of leadership ideas first, because I think the first part of solving an impossible problem is knowing as a leader what makes a difference in transforming things for a team. Once you have a series of answers for yourself, this is what I believe makes a good team. These are the kind of people that we need as team members. And these are the things that have been tried before. Then you can say, well, what do I need to do next? So on the leadership side, I think the fourth thing is really answering that question of what's the next right step? How will we investigate? How will we create a collaborative dialogue? And how will we start to unlock the potential based on good ideas of how the team might perform, how the team might improve, so on and so forth. So I mentioned all those leadership things because for the very first, the great thing about this trip was when you go internationally and you travel 30 plus hours to get to a place, very little in the flights go the way that you want, right? So I started out on this trip and it was an extraordinary distance and they routed me through a very different set of airports than I had expected. So where I had made all the arrangements of hotels and things like that, I ended up at an airport at 1 o'clock in the morning in a completely different city where I booked a hotel. And the reason to talk about leadership convictions and the reason to talk about what do you actually know of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. You land in an airport and it just so happens I happen to land in Bangalore at 1 o'clock in the morning, go through customs, do all the things you need to do. And to get to a particular hotel, I asked the security guard, could I just walk across the airport in the middle? And he said, absolutely not. You're not allowed. You don't have access. You cannot go through the middle of the airport. So what you need to do is go outside the airport at 1 o'clock in the morning, foreign city I don't know anything about, big crowds of people out there. You go outside the airport, walk around the airport to the other side, and there's a hotel for you. Well, knowing what I know about international travel and uncertain, I said, I'm not going to do that, right? I knew as a leader that I wasn't going to do things that were uncertain, that felt unsafe. And so what I did instead was turn around, go to a concierge desk and say, is there someone who could help me? The big difference in the United States versus India is that there are always other people around who have additional support roles, right? Whether I'm in the office setting up training sessions, whether I am working with different teams, there are extra people in an Indian office who are concierge-like assistants, right? Maybe they'll help you get the technology set up for your room. Maybe they'll help you get materials that you need. What I knew about being in India was that I could ask for help from someone else. So, in the example at the airport, I called a concierge. Walked over to the concierge. They called the hotel, and somebody came right down. So, for a person from the United States, if you are trying to hang out in an airport, it's not often that you'll stay overnight for 6 hours in an airport hotel, but it's common when you're coming in and out of India that you'll spend 5 or 6 hours. And that whole idea of an airport hotel and going across the airport, it was new to me, right? But when the gentleman came down, who was the concierge, the gentleman from the hotel, and he walked down and he came right across the middle of the airport. He walked through the places that I had asked if I could walk through. I couldn't, but he could. And it reminded me that while I wasn't going to follow the advice of the security guard and head outside, I was more than happy to have the concierge come, and he walked me right through the airport. Right? In the U.S., we don't have a context like that. There's nobody you can call and say, will you walk me through the airport? Will you get me to a certain hotel? But here in India, in Bangalore, here was this nice gentleman, and he helped out. What I want to convey in telling that story is that for a U.S. visitor, we really aren't sure about what it means when somebody says, there's no way for you to do this thing you want to do. We know that we have an idea that we'd like to get through an airport. We'd rather not go outside the airport at a certain time in the morning, not knowing the city and so on. But the gift is, if you know about international travel and you know about those extra friends in India, that concierge really made a difference for me. So on our way up to the hotel, I gave him what I would do as an American. $10, which was probably about 800 rupee. And later in the trip, my Indian friends were all aghast. You gave him 800 rupee? What did you do that for? And I said, well, I felt like he saved my life. He got me through the airport. He walked me through all the security things. He got my bag, worked to go, through scanners and things like that. But if you're approaching a problem and you're not sure what to do, the reason to be creative in thinking about new solutions is that you need to have that opportunity to stay certain that, for me, I wasn't going to go outside the airport, but I was going to find a way to get to the airport hotel, and I was going to find a way to take the hours that I needed. I mentioned that as a, just background for the beginning of the story, because what I really found all week that week when I came to the Hyderabad office was that everybody I met was delightful to work with. Everybody I met was eager to learn what to do. Everybody I met was thrilled that we had a chance to have those conversations together, because for the most part, they felt like they didn't know what was going on in the company. They didn't know what was going on about how they should do their software work. So what I think first and foremost, my leadership instinct was that we really needed to apologize. Big truck going by. We really needed to be able to open up a conversation, not from the standpoint of what's wrong, but really to open up the conversation about what is the team aligned to do and how can we help them build towards something better. Well, this is where I need to mention a couple other points about setting the stage for solving an impossible problem. And I frame it as an impossible problem because from the standpoint of the people in the US, they had no idea why this were not performing as quickly as they hoped. They had no idea why teams that were a little bit larger in India, say 8 or 10 team members versus 5 or 6 in the United States, would take longer to get certain things done, certain programming tasks and so on. So in going, the very first day, what I knew was I needed to open the conversation by asking about what was unique about this team. So I think the fifth principle of solving a possible problem is talking about what does this team bring to solve the problems. If you're in the middle of having collaborations between the United States and India, you aren't going to expect that everybody will operate the same exact way. If you're having these collaborations between brand new staff members, as we had in India, and experienced staff members, as we had over in the United States, they aren't going to approach those problems in the same way. So we ended up sitting in a very first meeting. And when I talk about opening the dialogue, I talk about unexpected ideas. What we found on that very first day was that this team that we were working with, we had, let's say, 12 digital team members, and they were first year and second year and third year employees. They were all being led by a manager who asked them every Friday to not work on anything. Pretty unusual. So I sit down in a meeting with these 12 team members, and they're so excited. They have a list of 50 different ideas of things that they've dreamed up that they think would help the company on different parts of the software, on different parts of the work. But immediately, when they're wanting to present their 50 ideas, what you got the sense of was that they were new staff who didn't know what we were doing in the United States, who didn't know what certain teams were even doing in their own office. So from about 10 minutes into the first meeting, we really needed to change the conversation. So they came with a list of 50 ideas, things that you could do, across the whole company to change how the software was and so on and so forth. Very eager, right? Very excited. They were thrilled to have the chance to dream big, and probably more than likely, they were being asked to dream about that were beyond their experience to really comment about. So very first of the conversation, here's 50 ideas they've got. What I did was turn it around to say, do you know about what our innovation system is? We have a specific way that we bring ideas in. We have a specific process by which every 6 weeks people can collect new ideas. And then your ideas, if they're really good, you should share 1 or 2, not 50. And looking at what they were doing, they were new staff who were super excited, and they were being asked to dream like they were 20 or 30-year experienced staff. So in solving this impossible problem, the very first thing we did at the beginning of the week was talk to them about how we could train together and learn together and start the process of changing things. So 3 other points that I'll make about solving an impossible problem. And then I want to talk to you very specifically about some training we did in the middle of the week. When you're solving an impossible problem, it's really important to take your team into a discussion about what their view of the problem space is. So we were sitting there having a conversation about their 50 ideas. And what we needed to do was say, well, what do you think the other teams are doing in your office? And it turned out that several of their ideas were being worked on by other teams working on analytics, for example, working on other parts of the software. There were other team members that were there in their office who had more experience that they could have turned to and asked questions of, but they hadn't learned about collaboration, or they hadn't learned about networking. What we framed in the first day was, tell me what you think the job of the software person is, and tell me what you think the other people are doing here in your office. By the end of the first day, we figured out that it might be beneficial to take these team members through some collaboration and team training exercises right there in the Hyderabad office. So Wednesday of the week, we dreamed up that we were going to have an afternoon training session for about 40 different team members. Well, the best part I can tell you in approaching an impossible problem is that we are always working with people who are skeptical of what we're going to try. We're always working with people who see us coming into an office and they'll smile and nod that they're willing to work with us, but they have big questions about whether it's going to be successful or not. So middle of the week, we decided to put together this training, and I had 2 or 3 product management staff that were there, and they were willing to do the training, willing to participate as leaders in the training session, but they said to me that they just weren't sure that anything like this would work in India. So with that understood, we got 45 team members together and we set up a conference room. And in setting up the conference room, what we were doing was talking about, how do you solve problems together? How do you collaborate together? What we had the fun of doing was first a very physical activity where we had a rope that was laid out in a certain way, and there were certain pieces of tape that demarcated spaces on the floor for one team on one side and one team on the other. They were told from the get-go that what we were going to do was solve a problem together. And the problem was where the rope needed to end up. But the challenge of the activity is that we lay it out like it's a competition. We say, if the rope ends up on one side or the other side, that team loses. So as we walked through this exercise, at the beginning, it seems like a competition, like you're fighting with the other side. And there was great energy that went back and forth as we tossed the rope from one side, tossed the rope to the other side, and so on. As we progress through this activity, though, we start to add up that one side has lost 9 times, one side has lost 7 times, but nobody had won, right? So the training activity gets to the point about 40 minutes in where we ask the question, well, who's winning? And the answer is not one side's losing 9 times, one side's losing 7 times. The answer is somebody needs to win. And really, it's the whole team that needs to win. So we ended up then having that moment of clarity where they figure out that in this particular activity, the rope needs to land in the middle. Instead of being on one side or the other, really the goal is for the team to figure out that for their completion of the task, winning is they've unlocked the fact that if they put the rope in the very middle between a couple of pieces of tape, they've actually solved a problem together. I mentioned that kind of physical, energizing activity because I think the very first thing that the team needed was to convince themselves that they could work with each other, right? There were analytics teams just down the way. There were digital teams that I was working with, and they're supposed to work hand in glove. Those are the kinds of teams that need to be able to collaborate directly. And instead, they were treating everything like they needed to talk to the United States first and not rely on the people that were there in their own office. So the second thing I'll mention is we did one more significant training event where we talked about unpacking a culture. We went through a whole exercise of having investigators come in, and we had some rules about a particular culture that was being visited. And the point of that exercise was, again, using the good skills of these engineers, the good thoughtfulness in solving a problem that wasn't a technology problem. So what we really landed on was that if we could create some exercises that let team members collaborate together, if we could do some activities that weren't technology activities, but instead have some fun, have a chance to change their perspective about who could work together in the office, who could ask questions together, what teams could solve things together. What we ended up with was the result that team members on Wednesday went from not really knowing that they could connect together with other people in their own office, not really knowing that there were other knowledgeable people who were working on almost the same problems they were working on. Instead, we had the chance to really focus that new skills could be acquired and new abilities delivered. We had the chance to say to each other, here's a couple of activities. If we could solve these problems together, certainly we could also solve other significant problems together. So we end the meetings after those kinds of training exercises with a chance to just have a dialogue about what's next. And in the dialogue, it came out that the product managers who were leading this conversation from the office had been very skeptical that any of it would make a difference. Instead, person after person said, I had fun today. I had the energy of working with another team today. I had a chance to learn something about that, my preconceptions when I go into solving a problem are not the same as the actual conclusion about what will solve the problem. We stepped our way through problems that weren't tech things so that we could talk about the skills we needed to deliver on those technology things. So before the end of the week, we did deep dive into product requirements. We deep dived into the different processes that were necessary. But I think there's a critical change that happens for a team when you bring in an outside voice or an outside idea generator. What the team more than anything benefited from was a chance to just sit down together and realize that they had an opportunity to learn, and they had an opportunity to be part of the dialogue about creating the new processes and the new ways of interacting and collaborating. So before the end of the week, we cycled through lots of good meetings, right? What do we need to get done? What are our priorities? What's the process? How do we put innovation in place? And where we really pushed the team was to say, how do you want to change the conversation? How do you want to build new dialogue? It's difficult if you're 12 hours away to have a regular daily cadence of team members meeting together. But it can be very eye-opening for people to realize that across 80 team members that were in this particular office, there were many people who had pieces and parts of the larger puzzle. So what I'd say sort of in conclusion about the training parts of things and the impossible problem solving that we were doing, what we ended up with was a chance for the team members to really take ownership of who they were and what they were going to contribute. And more than that, to be able to leave with an idea of who the resource people were, where they were, so that they could start to build capacity in their own office for the ways that we worked, for the ways that we needed software delivered. I think until you have a chance to drop into an office and see firsthand what they're doing and how they're doing it, you have no idea why they may be performing more slowly than another. You have no idea why they may be struggling with a particular issue. Many times the collaboration in the United States focuses on technical outputs and particular software outcomes. But I think the human side of those issues are very first and foremost concerned. How do people work in those different offices? How do they interact together? What do they think about being able to share their ideas and collaborate? What do they think about having a chance to push back against leadership if there's a certain direction? How do they take the opportunity to have the initiative to contribute? So long story short, I think that having a chance to really be in conversation and start to understand some of the cultural differences that could get in the way is an absolutely important piece of having an effective dialogue about your next technical outcomes. You can't have engineers from opposite parts of the world and expect that they're going to operate the same way, that they're going to think about hierarchy the same way. that they think about how they spend their time in the office the same way. And it's having those conversations where you can start to unpack how will we move forward and what accountability will we take for new ownership and new outcomes. Before I left Hyderabad that week, I would say the best surprise happened on the last day that I was there. I had team members all week who wanted to take me to Indian restaurants, right? They took me to restaurants that were representative of Hyderabad, or they took me to restaurants that were representative of North Indian cuisine or South Indian cuisine. Well, on the very last day, there was one couple that had been shepherding me to many of the restaurants and good friends that were hanging out a lot of the time. And they said, well, you've been here all week and you've had Indian food, but they said there's a favorite restaurant we have. This is our absolute favorite place. We go here every single week. Would you be willing to go with us to a different kind of place? It's not really like the rest of the Indian. So we go to a particular mall complex. Their son is along with us, and we all go. And their plain admission to me was this is their favorite place that they like to go. And we rounded the corner, and it was a restaurant called Buffalo Wild Wings. But for my friends in Hyderabad, what they didn't know was Buffalo Wild Wings is an American restaurant. And it's an American restaurant that's extremely popular with me and lots of my friends. It's a place that I would go every single week. But what was so funny was their perspective was that this was some uniquely Indian place that served chicken in a certain way and had certain sauces that were unusual. What I knew was all those things originated in Buffalo, New York. And whenever we're watching sports events, we go to Buffalo Wild Wings. So I ended the week not in a very foreign kind of restaurant that had different food from what I was used to, but actually in a restaurant that I would go to every single week, that I would be more than happy to be invited to go to. And it really reminded me that at the end of the day, we have many examples today of sort of our global culture, that we have a connection across restaurants or across businesses or across ways of doing business that is very connective and global. So my friends who were taking me to their favorite restaurant every week were actually taking me to one that I go to every week. And my friends who started the week thinking that we were going to be maybe far apart on different issues, instead came together to see that we had remarkable similarities and we had new ways of being able to work together to solve problems. So I'll pause there and ask if there are comments or questions.
Wow, sir, what a wonderful knowledge given by you, sir. I
Thank
hope
you.
our audience learned many new things from this session. I would like to highlight some of the points like creative thinking and techniques, communication and collaboration, practical tool and resources. Sir, there are few questions which our audience want to be answered. So, with your permission, shall we proceed with this question?
Please.
So the first question is that how do teams embrace failure as an opportunity for learning and growth rather than as an setback?
Right. Right. I think the best thing about failure is that it really only fails you if you don't learn from it, right? So when we have an instance that a brand new team is working and they're working, let's say, doing about a third of the work for a team that's experienced, the very first question you can ask is, have they been trained, right? Have they had exposure to these problems before? The second thing when you're talking about international product work is that you've got to have an open mind about whether the resources across the ocean are aligned to even be able to help teams be successful. Like India, you're many hours different, and getting a hold of a person to solve problems with you can be really challenging. But I think more than anything, those moments of failure when you were expecting a certain output and you didn't get it become absolutely critical to create a roadmap for the better pathway. Because if you can unpack exactly what happened or unpack what's happening culturally that's a challenge between the groups, then I think you can start to have a conversation about what does alignment look like, what does agreement look like, who can take ownership for a better outcome. So I would agree failure is one of those best vehicles to actually unpack things and really create a good plan about how to move forward.
Thank you for answering this question, sir. The next question is, what role does leadership play in guiding the team through the process of solving impossible problems?
It is a wondrous and multifaceted world, right? We in the United States tend to talk a lot about empowering individual staff and taking ownership of problems, but underlying those conversations is a real sense of hierarchy in technology. The tech world is very top down in terms of the experience people expect everybody to fall in line with their ideas and get on board with the plan, even if there's dialogue to say, oh, we can be creative and we can do all kinds of things. In India, in the office, leadership has a very different connotation, right? There's the idea when a director comes into your office, you're going to pay them special respect, you're going to give them special attention. So, in leadership context, the question is who's being asked to be a leader. And in India, the focus is often that leaders are really the people at the top with the title, but then further down in the team, they have to be able to take ownership for things that they're missing, things that they need. And I think there's just a wonderful dialogue to be had about how to do those things cross-culturally. Between the United States and India, we would talk about leadership very differently, but in technology, it ends up being very nearly the same thing. The leader, the director or vice president, really has to have a sensitivity for how to help the teams be good leaders too. What's
Thank
that?
you for answering this question, sir. The next question is, how do team optimize the use of available resources, including time, budget, and expertise, to tackle impossible problems?
Right. I think understanding the people that are involved in the team would be the very first thing that's going to make a difference. Just like a human resources group that meets regularly to talk about how do we improve. I think having regular dialogue with the teams that are in an office about how are you feeling, what are you experiencing, how's the pandemic going, as we're changing different policies about coming into the office or other things in your life, you can address limitations and resources if you can start to talk to the team members about what they're actually experiencing. So I'd say it's easier to get team members to buy in to limited resources or figuring out creative solutions when you first are owning the fact that they may be experiencing a lot of challenges personally and they need a dialogue with HR people or their team leaders to be able to feel better about how things are, and then they can start to creatively answer, how do we cut certain costs, how do we cut certain resources, and I think if it comes from the team, that's one of the best ways to handle cuts in resources and limitations and challenges.
Thank you for answering this question, sir. The next question is, how do team assess and manage risk associated with the attempting to solve impossible problems?
Right. So really a management, like the question of what do managers do in those situations? I think for all of us, we're learning about what work looks like now after the last 4 years, right? The pandemic, I think, really pushed people to understand stress differently in the office, to understand people differently in the office. In the United States, we talk a lot about emotional IQ, being able to listen to the signals from your staff members. And I think that there's a real role for training managers in both working with teams who are under stress and who have real challenges in what's going on in the country for like a pandemic situation. But I think there's also valuable training to be done for managers about how do they create a dialogue today about what good practices are. And particularly for international projects, you have to have a conversation about what an Indian office needs and what a United States office needs. And have some experts there who can talk to them about the cultural differences that maybe make it seem impossible to get things done.
Thank you for answering this question, sir. The last question is, how can team encourage creative and innovative thinking to explore unconventional solution to impossible problems?
It's one of the best things about being stuck is that you've gone through the list of all the things you've tried before, right? Maybe we're using some practices from before the pandemic, and now we're trying to solve some problem after the pandemic. And I think when you reach that point where you're really stuck, I think there's an incredible opportunity if you bring the team together and you're whiteboarding solutions and you're talking through different solutions. What you have is a chance to say, hey, all the things that we've been used to doing don't seem to be adding up to a solution. So what do we as a team do today to own the fact that our company is in desperate need of turning a corner or moving in a different direction? I think that when you can have those more candid conversations, and sometimes what you have to do is have a lesser titled leader do that in India. So I might have a frontline product manager have that conversation with developers. I might have somebody who doesn't have a director title, VP title, have those conversations. Then you can open up uh, a more candid conversation, right? People aren't uh, hiding behind the status or the hierarchy, and can start to say, well, if I were going to solve this problem, I would do these 5 things. And you can whittle it down to, let's try this one thing next, right? Like you can do uh, a sequencing of different ideas. But I think being able to make it easier for staff members to break apart their dialogue, to actually be open to challenging each other and engaging each other, you have to bring it to that right level that makes sense. And then I think the impossible problem begins to shift to a series of tests or a series of experiments. And then I think you can really solve things much more quickly.
That was a very good piece of advice given to us, sir. Again, thanking you all for attending today's webinar. And if you have any additional questions, you can contact us by email or telephone. We are happy to provide additional support to you. Please follow us on our social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for new learning.